Today's video is sponsored by Ground News, of whom more in a bit. Good evening. Today we are looking at Lancaster Gate. Why? Well, I found this postcard. Sometimes I get inspiration from history, sometimes from current events, and sometimes I'm just having a clear out. The postcard dates from about 1912. It depicts the Italian fountains at Kensington Gardens, and it's pretty explicit about the fact that it's propaganda for the Central London Railway. Lancaster Gate Station is, these days, not exactly inspiring, at least at street level. To me, it looks like a high street branch of a supermarket chain that no longer exists. Is that too weird and specific? Like, it was a gateway and then it was a Summerfield and then it closed at some point in the early 90s. I think this simile is running away from me. The point I'm making is that it's one of the less inspiring underground frontages. No one's putting this on a postcard. It used to look a lot nicer. I found an image from 1935 on the London Transport Museum's website, and while the frontage looked kind of grubby by then, it was London before the Clean Air Act, you can see how much fancier it looked. Lancaster Gate is on the Central Line. The Central Line started life as the Central London Railway and opened in 1900. It was a lot shorter then, only running from Bank to Shepherd's Bush. Lancaster Gate was thus one of the first stations on that line. The station was originally going to be called Westbourne after a local underground river which also gives its name to a nearby street. That river famously has a connection with another tube station. It runs right through Sloane Square in a big pipe. But instead they named it Lancaster Gate. Now there is a street named Lancaster Gate and also a gate into the park, but neither of them is especially close. Actually, this gate is more or less opposite the station and leads straight to the fountains. The fountains were built in 1860. Prince Albert was looking for a present for Queen Victoria, and he faced that eternal problem. What do you get the woman who has everything? Well, a significant chunk of everything, anyway. These fountains were his solution. The view in the postcard is no longer visible thanks to a bunch of trees and bushes, but otherwise it's a delightful place to pass some time. If it's not raining, which it was when I filmed this. The Central London Railway proudly advertised themselves as the Twopenny Tube, because they had a flat fare of 2p. They liked to push this idea that theirs was a line for everyone from all social classes, and that you could get to all kinds of places on their line. The big problem commuter railways faced was that they made the bulk of their money during the week, in the morning and evening rush hour. If you could get people to use your line for leisure travel as well, you could maximise the income from your line. So that's what this postcard is about. Why go all the way out to the countryside when for a mere twopence you could see this? So yes, propaganda is nothing new. Maybe I'm biased, but I feel like it's worse now than it's ever been. And that's why I'm glad to be partnering once again with Ground News. Ground News is a news aggregator that gives you a broader view of what's going on, by not only gathering the news together but showing you the different biases of each news outlet. For instance, let's take a look at this story about a warning by the IFS about the need to raise taxes. Well, obviously that's something that affects all of us, except the tax dodgers, I suppose. We can see from the summary that there's more coverage on the right than the left. 5 sources on the right compared to 4 on the left, and 4 in the centre. Let's compare what the different sides are saying. The Independent leans left and says that this could be the most consequential rise since at least 2010, which was when the Conservative Party were in power. But the right-leaning Times explicitly says that the tax rise must be twice as much as George Osborne's budget in 2010. It feels like they're both using the same comparison but in different ways to different effects. The Independent seems to be implying that things were worse under the Conservatives. The Times is implying that they were better, purely by choice of words. And this is why it's useful to get a broad view. Don't let yourself get tricked. Ground News also allows you to create your own custom feed. which I like because, being a transport journalist, influencer, content creator type person, I need to know what's actually going on as quickly as possible. For instance, if I say that I particularly want to see news about London, I can do that. Isn't that neat? In a world where it seems that everyone has an agenda, ground news is a great way of cutting through all that. If that sounds like something you'd be into, then follow the link below or use this QR code to get 40% off the Vantage subscription. That's the one I have, and that's the one that gives you access to all features. Anyway, enough of the news, let's get back to the olds. The station itself was designed by the architect Harry Bell Measures, who designed all the original Central London railway stations. Most of his original buildings have been swept away, including the one at Lancaster Gate, but you can still see his style at Queensway, Holland Park and Oxford Circus. The brown terracotta was fired using a technique known as half-baking, but there was nothing half-baked about these elaborate frontages. The colour was a deliberate choice to enable these buildings to strike a balance. They were elaborate enough to be distinctive, but the colour meant that they didn't stand out too much compared to their surroundings. The line was running through the genteel suburbs of West London, and their inhabitants had a tendency to get jumpy about public transport developments, so it paid not to be too garish. Lancaster Gate was topped off with the Park Gate Hotel, which was designed by Delissa Joseph in red brick. Joseph designed the buildings above a number of other tube stations, including Oxford Circus and Queensway. It seems that the Central London Railway liked his style, which blended in rather well with Measures' stations. At platform level, Lancaster Gate has a lot more of its original features. The Central London Railway liked to use white tiling. Now, this seems very plain, particularly compared with what other underground railways were doing in the early 20th century, but there was a purpose to this. Well, two purposes, in fact. Firstly, it enabled the platforms to be better illuminated. The stations were lit by electric arc lamps, which weren't as bright as modern lights, so the white tiling reflected that light. And secondly, it illustrated the fact that the station was clean. The Central London Railway was powered by electricity. It wasn't the first electric railway in London, but they weren't going to let a little thing like that stand in their way. So at platform level, their stations were bright and unblemished by soot. They even whitewashed their tunnels with a special train, which is real commitment to the bit if you ask me. The tiles at platform level have been replaced over the years, but the ones up above are original. When built, Lancaster Gate would also have had wooden platforms, which were later replaced due to the obvious fire hazard. The station has no escalators but uses lifts. Lancaster Gate has been particularly notorious for its lifts over the years, which by the early 21st century were unreliable to a dangerous degree. They were replaced in 1988, refurbished in 2006, and replaced completely in 2017. The problem is that Lancaster Gate is quite a small station. While it's not one of the busier stations in Zone 1, the size means that the crowds it does get can overwhelm it. When the lifts were replaced in 2017, the whole station had to be closed because there simply wasn't the capacity to work on a lift while it was still in use. So how did we get from Harry Bell Measures' elaborate frontage to, well, this? It all goes back to the 1960s. In 1968, the old building was knocked down and replaced with an office block, which was converted into a hotel not long afterwards. The 1960s were a frankly terrible time for the London Underground. Oh, sure, we got the Victoria line out of it, but the general attitude seemed to be that the tube was passé and we'd all be driving soon enough. So stations dating from this era made no architectural statement other than, here's a tube station, take it or leave it. It's as visible as it needs to be, but no more. Maybe I'm being unfair, but it's hard for me to speak out in defence of the stations of that era. Put it this way. When Lancaster Gate was built, the hotel was incorporated into the development of the station. When Lancaster Gate was rebuilt, the station was incorporated into the development of the hotel, or office block. The point is that the station was low priority as compared to what sat on top of it. The architectural style was very much brutalist, and the frontage in those days was tiled. By the early 1980s, the Central Line was rather run down, and in 1982 a modernisation programme was put to the Greater London Council. Lancaster Gate was part of that, but it wasn't actually modernised until 1988. The waiting time to get it fixed up outlasted the actual GLC, which was dissolved in 1986. Not really relevant, I just thought it was interesting. The ticket hall was refurbished, and that tiled frontage was replaced with the current glass screen. And the lifts were replaced, but I already said that. In the 2000s, the hotel was reclad, and therefore so was the station. And with the replacements and refurbishments of the last couple of decades, we have this. I honestly think it's a strong contender for my least favourite station, at least from the outside. I mean, it looks like it should house ventilation equipment, or an electrical substation. One handy tip regarding Lancaster Gate that people unfamiliar with London are maybe not aware of is that it's very close to Paddington. In fact, it has out-of-station interchange with Paddington, so you may wish to consider it if switching between the Central Line and the District, Hammersmith and City, Circle, Bakerloo or Elizabeth lines. Or if you're just, going to Paddington. Lancaster Gate is easy to miss, both literally and figuratively. It's not super highly used, but it definitely does have its uses. I just wish it was a bit prettier. Well, I do hope you enjoyed this carefully screened tale from the tube. If so, please do leave a like and perhaps subscribe if you'd like to see more, or if you just like subscribing to things. I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your support. You are the white tiling to my arc lighting. I'd also like to thank Ground News for once again partnering with this channel. Click the link in the description below or follow this QR code to take advantage of their generous offer. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.